I had no idea I was going to be making a third devlog. When I published the second one, most of the work to be done was just creative stuff. New enemies, items, their models, and implementation. There wasn't much to do besides that, but it turns out there's still a lot of stuff I can talk about. Some technical, some not, and just as a heads up, a lot of the features mentioned are in no specific order. I have terrible memory. I think I talked about this before, I got no idea. If you didn't know, I'm making a dungeon game where the only light source is you. There are offhand items that go in your left hand, which gets converted into a stat called light aura, which is used to determine how much light your body emits. The first thing that I want to talk about is probably the most technical thing on this list. For the longest time, generation has been horrible, but I finally fixed it. Now, the generation system I had in place before worked, but it had flaws. For me, these flaws weren't common, they were rare, but when I had my friends beta test the game, yeah, they had a lot of trouble with it. The way it worked was mostly inspired by Minecraft's jigsaw generation system and a bit of what I did in my own time. Each room has doorways, and each doorway would put up a wall piece or a new room. And if a room overlaps with another, we replace it with a wall. Sounds simple, right? I mean, I thought the same thing. For whatever reason, half the time, this just wouldn't work. It got worse when rooms had shapes that would overlap with itself. Take this L-shaped room, for example. If it generates another L-shaped room, the new room is overlapping with the one that generated it, and it wouldn't work. So I went back to my code, broke it up into multiple methods so it was easier to read and manipulate, and added a bounding box collision to each room blueprint. I replaced the old collision check system to include the bounding box. I figured that before a room spawns, I could have it run a box overlap the shape of the bounding box before we generate the room. After all, we already selected the room, so that bounding box data has to exist somewhere, right? So I wrote some code that would get that information, but the box is generated in funky shapes. After some debugging, turns out the bounding box extents were all 0, which is not what I wanted to see. Now, I don't even ask me how it looks the way it looks if it's all 0. If it's 0, it should just be a little speck, right? But it wasn't. It was I didn't take screenshots though. What I'm showing you was artificially made, but this is what it looked like. And I did print statements that would print the extent, and it was 0. Tell me how this makes sense. Instead of being a mature, responsible, and well-disciplined developer and figuring out a better way, I went back to my old ways. I kept the modularity since it worked much better for me, but instead of pulling a box shape from a to-be spawned room, I just spawned the room, took its bounding box, and then destroyed the room again just to check if it's intersecting with any other room's bounding box, and if not, spawn it again. Oh my god, this is horrendous. Now, I could probably take out the destroy the room immediately part and put that under the hey it's intersecting code, but I am too tired for anything else, not to mention I doubt it's having that big of an impact on performance. I mean, are we living in the 90s? I didn't think so. Anyways, I compiled the new code, and with 0 expectations, it worked. Not just, yeah, it works 80% of the time. No. It worked. It works. I mean, it works. I'm using it now. I have not run into a single dungeon that had overlapping rooms or no boss rooms or any other soft locks. It works, and I am done with generation. Alright, now if you didn't catch on by now, this game is made in Unreal Engine 5, which is notorious for horrible performance, mainly because of Nanite and Lumen, both of which are systems designed for some real high-quality AAA lighting and performance. Issue is, when you use it on a game like this, where everything is low poly, these systems only kill performance. I disabled Nanite a long time ago, and I thought I disabled Lumen as well, which, mind you, is all about lights. My game has none! Turns out I didn't, so I went back into the settings, found it, and figured out how to properly turn it off, because there's no just off switch apparently. Another small thing I did was add generic ambience. Whenever you walk through any of the dungeons, you'll occasionally hear some noise off in the distance. Take a listen. It's a subtle detail, and I didn't expect it to have much of an effect, but it just makes the dungeons feel a little more lively and a little spookier. I have plans to add specific sounds for different regions as well. Also, swords and daggers now have trails. They're not the greatest, but they work pretty well about 90% of the time. I just have a crappy trail Niagara system that latches onto the item's sword center socket, which is just an invisible point on the back of the blade. Then, when the swinging animation plays, the Niagara system turns on. Once the animation finishes, the system turns off. Pretty simple and pretty effective compared to having no trail. I also made it so that each weapon can have its own unique trail, so while most will use this generic white trail, some will use more colored and glowing ones. Since these trails are all separate, I can also make more unique effects when the time comes. I also added pickup text. I still want to make it look a little fancier at some point, but for now it works pretty well. All it does is display the name of the last item you picked up on the bottom and removes it after about 4 seconds. It's simple but useful, especially for items that look similar but function differently, mainly the potions. Speaking of potions, these used to be pretty cheap on how they worked. It'd share properties that every item has: bonus health, defense, damage, etc. Except instead of activating it passively, it'd add these to your current stats for a brief duration when you use them. This was fine for the most part, but it wouldn't let me intercept anything. Nothing on the effects, nothing on the duration, and absolutely zero information and zero control. So I eventually got off my ass and swapped this to a struct, which is essentially a list of details. You can put numbers, strings, booleans, and whatever else you want inside, and it's all packed up neatly. While it functions mostly the same, potions no longer stack, and because of the struct, I was able to make it so you can now view active effects in your info menu. I plan to swap the indicator's texture for a texture unique to the potions tier, but for now it's gonna have to work. There's also a new NPC added back in April, Keeper. Using the same system in place for tracking which levels the player is beaten, I made it so that you can give her items to hold onto while you explore other rooms. For the sake of giving shekels and gems more use, I also made it so that you can pay her more to hold more. To start, you'll hold 5, and every time you upgrade, you'll hold a little more. The GUI is the same as Aaron's, the guy who upgrades your weapons. I'll probably make her a custom UI at some point, but since the two have similar functions, they're just gonna share one for now. Next up, I'm going to talk about Lightkeep and his new life support systems. I don't want to show off too much of Lightkeep's third phase because frankly it's kind of ugly right now. I'm working on it. But there's going to be these 2 sentries that will aim at you and fire lasers. When they're active, they're going to heal Lightkeep at a rapid pace. Destroying one will slow down the healing, but until both are dead, your odds of killing Lightkeep beforehand are low. To help make the fight a little harder, Lightkeep also has the ability to drop mines around him. Stepping on one will, of course, cause an explosion, meaning you need to watch where you step. So for a while, combat has been kind of a one-route thing. You have magic, ranged weapons, and melee, but melee was pretty useless unless you wanted to tank hits. I mean, sure, it had its benefits, but in comparison to magic or bows, there was just no point. So to help with that, I gave melee 3 additional abilities: parrying, sweeping, and knockback. To start with the latter, knockback was pretty simple. Every time you hit an enemy with a sword or a dagger, the enemy is pushed back slightly. Swords also now have a sweeping effect, so if you swing in between 2 enemies, both of them will be affected. And then finally, parrying. This was mad annoying to set up, and I'm pretty sure I did something wrong, but you know what? It works, so I am not touching anything. Using the already built block function, you can now fully parry attacks by blocking at the right time. The animations are crappy, I know, but it was the best that I could do. You can tell if you can parry an enemy or not if a red ring appears around the wrist. This I'll probably move at some point, but for now the beta testers seem to like where it's placed. With this done, melee combat now has a bit of a stronger spot among the 3, but it can still often feel weak compared to other weapons, so some balancing definitely needs to take place. At some point before early access, I also plan to add classes for the 3 roles, which would empower one and weaken the others, along with a 4th in-between role that would change nothing in case you wanted to use everything. Some other smaller additions include power-ups and notes. Power-ups are items you'll sometimes find across the map that will improve a certain stat by a little bit for the rest of the run. Naturally, you'll lose the effects once you leave the dungeon. And notes are little pieces of world building you'll sometimes find in crates or even just laying around in corners that mostly contain lore. I don't think either of these will be included in the first build of early access. There's a couple more power-ups I want to add, and I want a lot more notes in the game before people start reading them, but their implementation is in. And finally, I'm going to talk about the next 2 regions, the Buried Deserts and the Green Valleys. For the longest time, I always mentioned them right alongside the labyrinths, but I've never had any screenshots to show or even concept art, but now they are both here. First, I'm going to talk about the deserts. These rooms are probably easiest to see in low light. In the labyrinths or Green Valleys, the walls are more gray, so naturally it's already going to be a little dark, but in the deserts, you got sand-colored walls, which is brighter, which means you can see it easier. I think. I'm not sure. I'm not a scientist, but it ain't theory. Go ahead and look. Instead of finding random bricks laying around, you're going to find little cacti, buried skulls, and tombs. I also changed crates up so they're more yellow. I'm a creative genius, I know. Relax. There are, of course, exclusive items and enemies in this region. Scorpions and mummies patrol the halls as elementals lock areas down. You'll come across different items like the flaming ring, which tanks a hit, or the desert bow, which fires shards with each arrow. In terms of how the rooms generate, it's functionally the same, but the buried desert introduces layers to each floor. You'll start up high, but find that the rooms keep going down. And then to help with the ambience of the place, I also added floating sand particles to each room. It's a nice little touch that helps make it feel more like a desert. As for the Green Valleys, it's covered in grass. Surprisingly, it isn't performance heavy. I had to do a little math to figure out how to position them, but each grass model is instanced, which cuts down the draw calls tremendously. These rooms are also the darkest because the rooms are a dark stone gray, so more light aura would be useful. To help, I made up a dumb reason for the player starting with an added 25 light aura. It isn't a crazy improvement, but it definitely helps see. Amongst the grass, you can also see some randomly placed rocks. Like the deserts, the valleys have their own items as well. I wanted to go for a pattern where the labyrinths had a mix of everything. Buried Desert had a focus on magic, and Green Valleys had a focus on healing. So most of the items here increase your max health and regeneration stats. For example, Nature's Grace would give 35 max HP and a permanent 2 HP regen. I had to go into the item's class code for the first time in months to add the possibility of them increasing max HP, but it didn't take much to get that working. Tying back to what I said earlier with melee weapons, I wanted to take a step towards melee weapons having more unique properties. So I created the katana for the valleys, which if you hit an enemy would launch you towards them. And since you have a fair amount of air control, you can move back quickly, to the side quickly, or wherever else you need to. It isn't the most useful item, but I thought it was kind of neat to have. And then for the enemies, I wanted to have robotic animals, but it ended up just being a mix of robots and living organisms. Snakes will crawl towards you concealed by the grass, as owls, which follow the robot idea, will find you through the darkness, making your detection stat useless. I finally gave Lightkeep the dialogue he was planned to have a long time ago. I couldn't decide if I should give the bosses voice lines, since the NPCs have just text dialogue, and it would be weird to mix the two styles, especially when a couple NPCs will be a major part in the story later down the line. But eventually I decided on text-based dialogue. This might change later, but it works pretty well for now. When you trigger one of the fights, Lightkeep will say a few things briefly before starting to attack. For lore reasons, I can also give him dialogue for if you fight him after he kills you, and dialogue for if you fight him after you win. Using this system, I can easily make any boss say anything I want following any condition. I also made a short little early access trailer that you probably saw if you've been keeping up with the game. It's not great. It's my first time ever making something like this. I'll probably make another one that's like a minute and a half long. The main issue with this short one is that there's zero context. I was gonna add context, I just forgot. So it's really only good for people who've been following the game for a while, but whatever, I'll make another one. Other than most of those bigger changes, some other stuff happened as well. Tons of stats were tweaked, you can no longer gamble as much as you could with Ace, the crappy parallax occlusion for the walls has been replaced with actual popped out bricks, and a few other things. Of course, there's still a lot of balancing to do before it's actually good, but the game itself plays out pretty well for now. And that's it. This is probably, or most definitely, the last devlog for a good while. If you missed it, there is a Steam page up for the game. If you have any interest in it at all, go ahead and wishlist it, it would help a lot. But that's all for now. See ya.